So anyone who steps foot into Hong Kong will immediately realize that the city is a shopper's paradise, especially for high-end consumers, especially for mainland consumers. The influx of mainland shoppers has had a considerable impact in the retail industry, but also the rest of the community. For years, much has been said about China's voracious appetite for all things luxury, fine wine, watches, food, art, and fashion. Erwan Rambourg, who's French, by the way, has much to add to the topic. Our guest speaker today is currently the managing director and global co-head of consumer and retail equity research at HSBC. Prior to that, he was a marketing manager for various luxury goods giants like LVMH and Richemont. He has recently published his first book called The Bling Dynasty: Why the Reign of Chinese Luxury Shoppers Has Only Just Begun, which is essentially a 10-chapter argument that luxury demand will continue to be dominated by Chinese consumers. Much of what he'll discuss today stems from the research analysis he gathered for that book. He's here to dispel some misconceptions about whether the concept that China is going to be the world's biggest luxury consumer. He'll talk about Chinese versus Western brands, including why there are no Chinese luxury names challenging Western models, and more. So let's hear what he has to say. Everyone, please give a warm welcome to Erwan Rambourg.
I like to walk when I talk. Thanks a lot for the welcoming words. Usually I speak super slowly, but I just figured out that I had 20 minutes. I thought I had 40. So I'll go through the slides pretty quickly, and hopefully we can then open up for questions. The Bling Dynasty started as a pretty bad play on words. It's a reference to the Ming Dynasty, which obviously developed and expanded the Great Wall. The idea is the Bling Dynasty is the future of luxury consumption, with Chinese consumers expanding the great mall of luxury consumption. Just a quick presentation. As was mentioned, I used to work in the industry in marketing functions, and bizarrely found myself doing what I'm doing now, which is, technically speaking, being a financial analyst. To understand what I do, I basically write research on luxury for investors. An easy way to put it, and the way I put it to my kids, is basically I write books that people don't read, and then I travel the world to tell them what's in the book. So now I've written a book, and I'm hoping that someone will read it. Just a short quote from Tory Burch. This is not about Chinese consumption, but it could be. It's this idea that 10 years ago, Chinese consumers were a dream for many of the brands, and then gradually it became bigger and bigger. It became a real reality, moving the needle for the destiny of many of these brands, to the point where now, for some brands, it's becoming scary because they are dominated by Chinese consumers. So I'll tell you a few things. I'll look at 5 different themes that you'll find within the book. So the first one is just looking at the market itself, Chinese consumption. Second theme is looking at what the pressures are from trying to grow what's supposed to be exclusive, a whole contradiction, recurring contradiction within the luxury space. Thirdly, telling you about thinking Chinese, not thinking just about China. Fourth, and this might sound a bit odd, but this idea that Chinese consumers in luxury are becoming American, not Japanese. And then lastly, mentioning if there are any threats to European models from Chinese or other brands. So starting with the market itself, the idea is 35% of sales of luxury today are driven by Chinese consumers. If you went 10 years back, you'll have the Japanese actually representing about a third of sales. And the projection is for the market to double and for Chinese to represent 50% at least of sales. Now, if you interview watch companies, they're already in 2025. Okay, so this is an aggregate of basically underdeveloped brands such as Tory Burch. You know, they will see Chinese contributing to maybe 15, 20%, and more developed brands, watch brands, notably. The implication of this is the Japanese consumer is not growing anymore in luxury, and the Western European consumer is not growing anymore either. And I can answer questions on that later if you want. Obviously, it's not a unified market, very diverse market. If I were to ask you, we might be 50, 60 here. What's your definition of luxury? I'd get 50, 60 different definitions. And I've created a few characters in the book. Calvin Lee, for example, will call Starbucks luxury. Why on earth should I be paying $4 for a coffee when I can get something equivalent for a fourth of the price? Well, it's pretty simple, because I want to fit in. It's what we've called the third place. You know, your first place is home, second place is the office, or vice versa if you're a workaholic. The third place is the café in France, it's the pub in the UK, it's 7-Eleven in Indonesia, and it might be Starbucks in China. It's a place where you mingle, it's a place where you meet friends, friends of friends, and you fit in and you talk about what counts for you. Politics, religion, football. Hermès and Brittany obviously would see Starbucks as everyday consumption. Okay, so this is a different version from the Maslow pyramid that you might know if you've done some marketing. I've called it the Maslux pyramid. The idea is you recruit people who then trade up within the pyramid. This pyramid in 10 years' time has exactly the same shape in my view. Okay, I'm not taking the view that you'll have an hourglass shape in terms of consumption, very high-end, very low-end, outperforming. I'm not taking the view that you'll have a collapsed pyramid with only access price points developing. I am taking that view that existing consumers will trade up and you'll bring new consumers into the trade. So same shape, but obviously a lot bigger. Twice as many consumers, 3 times the sales. One of the interesting attributes from the Chinese luxury consumers is they were traditionally male-driven, driven a lot by B2B and B2G as in government gifting, and driven a lot by watches, not IWC specifically, but Omega. Omega really is the brand that started to develop the luxury market in China. And this male-driven industry is going to look a bit more like what you see on the right, so more female-driven, young women, difficult to please. They don't seem to be smiling that much. The idea is the Chinese consumers are going from male to female-driven. The world is actually going the other way around. I don't know if you've heard about herbivores, which is a Japanese concept. Herbivores are very young men who are called herbivores because they refuse flesh. They're not in a relationship. They don't have a girlfriend or a wife. And they basically spend their time and money on cosmetics, on grooming themselves, on small leather goods, on playing video games, et cetera, et cetera. They participate to the issue that Japanese have that's called single parasites. So they're basically increasing the issues of demographics. These herbivores in Japan, you will find equivalents in Korea. You will actually find equivalents in Western Europe, in the US. What might have been called 15 years ago metrosexual, so men actually starting to actually move the needle in luxury. So that's on the Chinese market. Consequences of trying to grow what's supposed to be exclusive. This could have been about the Nigerian, the Brazilian, the Indonesian consumer. It just so happens that the Chinese consumer is the one moving the needle for the future. And this leads to issues of ubiquity. Trying to keep your existing consumer, but still trying to recruit a younger consumer. One example of this sort of brand schizophrenia is in this ad for Gucci. You have a combination of black and white setting, and in the middle, an embossed gold Gucci. You have a combination of theoretically unknown, very young model to, I don't know if you know who she is, she's actually the heiress to the throne of Monaco. She is the granddaughter of Grace Kelly. And then you have the logo, the motto, which is forever now. Which is it? You know, am I buying this because it's been around forever, or am I buying Gucci because it's my generation's brand? Another example with this, I have nothing against Gucci, but it just so happens that their brand ads are fabulous. Do you think this is a logo handbag? Raise your hand if you do. Okay, so it's mixed. Gucci would consider this as a non-logo handbag. Okay, the reason for this is they've moved away from canvas, logo-heavy bags to more sophisticated, more refined products in leather. But at the same time, they want to please that more sophisticated consumer, but they can't shoot themselves in the foot and get rid of that aspiring consumer, hence the discreet embossed logo. Do you know what the French paradox is? Okay, I thought so. I have a sister who's a journalist. She tells me, yes, anything around alcohol, journalists will know. So it's basically this study, this survey, medical survey, early 90s, that tends to prove that it's better for your health to drink 2 glasses of French red wine every day than not to. You don't drink wine, not great. You drink a bit, fantastic. You drink too much, you know what the consequences are. The French paradox can be applied to luxury. And the reason I called it French is because I have Vuitton in mind. With this idea that if your brand is unknown, you're not going to sell. If you're niche, if you're edgy, you're a hot brand, people will queue up to buy you. If you have become too big, think Vuitton, think Gucci, there's an issue of ubiquity. And you start to have comments along the lines of, this is my mother's brand. This is a brand for secretaries. No offense if anyone has a Vuitton or Gucci. And so when you're drinking wine, it's easy to cut back, hopefully. When you have developed that perception on luxury products, it's a lot more difficult to change the perception. Another consequence of growth is what I've called going lifestyle. So this idea that certain brands that may have maxed out in their core business will find it more difficult to grow and will look at diversification. This could be Vuitton, this could be Coach. Coach started with baseball mitts in the early 40s, so their core competency is leather. And then seeing that it was more difficult for them to grow, they've diversified into footwear, into apparel, into watches, into jewelry, into fragrances, et cetera, et cetera. The issue is potentially brand equity dilution. The issue is potentially dilution of your margins because it's not your core, and so it's costly, and you have to allocate a lot of space in the stores. So back to the Chinese, with this idea of thinking Chinese, not China. In my view, only about a quarter of sales to Chinese takes place in China. So when investors call me up and say, hey, what's going on in China? I try to move that conversation to what's going on with the Chinese, because that's more relevant. A few destinations, typically Western Europe, typically Hong Kong, I think both under pressure right now for different reasons. A reason of commoditization of retail and basically Chinese people wanting to go to more exotic places. Likelihood is if I'm a wealthy Chinese, I've been to Hong Kong before, I might have gone to Paris and Milan also. In Western Europe, you might have seen this article in the FT, again 3 days ago. You've had instances of tourists being mugged. Okay, so it is cheaper, but is it worth the security risk? And then you've had, obviously, FX, so currency being strong, the euro being strong, the pound being strong. Hong Kong, I think, is a victim of commoditization of retail. And so you're starting to see wealthy Chinese individuals look at other destinations. And right now, I'm thinking that the new TST, so to speak, is probably Tokyo, Seoul, Taipei. These are the three hot markets where wealthy individuals are moving to. So that destination you see in the middle is Asia X Japan and X Hong Kong. And then if you look at the US, that's an up-and-coming destination. The Obama administration being very pragmatic, making it easier as of 2.5 years ago to go. So why are Chinese people buying abroad? Anyone? Cheaper. Safer. Usually I hear cheaper, but safer on my left. Several reasons. Time. If you're in your home market, you're at work, you're stressed out, you need time. Either because you're on vacation, or you're on a business trip, you have a few hours to spend in the airport, or in between meetings in a downtown area. Regulation. A lot easier to go to the US, to the UK, to Korea. You only have direct flights to Taipei as of the past 7 years. Before you had to go via Hong Kong. Everything's becoming easier. With regulation, links are opening up. And you only have 4% of passport holders from mainland China, when you have 30% of American citizens, 70% of Brits holding passports. Affordability, cheaper, probably will stay that way. Validation is this idea of fitting in. So if you think about social media, I can post a picture of my Gucci bag, I can post that picture of me holding it, but much better, I can post that picture with the Duomo behind me. I was there. I was in Italy. I bought it in the country of origin. Experience is the reality or the illusion that the service, the staff in store will be more knowledgeable and better at storytelling, okay? Instead of having a doubt of, does she really know what she's talking about? Was she working at KFC last week? I'm not saying it's a reality, but you do have that doubt. And then I needed an L to spell travel. So this is a weaker point. Legitimacy is this idea that in smaller tier cities, you still have a doubt on whether you're buying a fake or not. If you're buying locally, you still have a lot of fake Apple stores, a lot of fake Victoria's Secret stores, I'm told. I don't spend a lot of time there. This is a picture from the CEO of DFS, travel retail, big company. He took this in the middle of nowhere in a very small town in China. And what you see is Chinese artifacts in the middle of that living room. And this little postcard with the Eiffel Tower on it. So it means that even in very remote places where people can't afford to travel, it's an obsession to travel. The risk of Chinese people traveling is China becoming a showroom. You discover the products, but you'll go and buy them elsewhere or online. Typically Graf, I don't know if you know Graf, very high-end diamond stone supplier. They're very happy to lose money in Chinese stores. It doesn't matter, because their clients are multimillionaires who at the end of the day will shop in London, will shop in Hong Kong, and it's fine. Miu Miu. You know Miu Miu? The sister brand of Prada, named after Miuccia Prada, was her nickname when she was a girl. Miu Miu was very well known by the French, the Italians, the Japanese, the Koreans, but they needed to go global, meaning they needed to target the Chinese consumer. And to do that, they built flagships. Those flagships are probably not selling that well, but when you have wealthy individuals traveling abroad, they see the brand, they connect to it, it's legitimate because they've seen it in flagships in Shanghai or Hong Kong. This is an odd concept, but if the Japanese were dominating in the luxury space 10 years ago, there is a risk that Chinese become Japanese and that the growth disappears. The big difference is Japanese have moved away from brands. Okay? There's a lot of down trading in Japan. You have people exiting the space. And you were looking at a very specific consumer profile, the so-called office lady or pink-collar worker, basically living at her parents', being entertained by her boyfriend, allocating a vast disposable income to her fourth Vuitton handbag. Okay? That has evolved. She's growing older. She's not being replaced as much. Chinese consumers are still very keen on brands. The appetite for brands is huge. It's expressed slightly differently with that lighter logo at Gucci, for example. The first time I went to China, I met a lot of men wearing labels outside the suits to say, hey. Okay, so it's more subtle, but there is still a keen appetite for brands. This is an even more bizarre concept, probably, but the idea is the American consumer is becoming more Chinese, the Chinese consumer is becoming more American. The American consumer was dominated by this idea of feeling guilty, staying quiet, buying cheap. Okay? Feeling guilty with everything that's happened in the US, whether it's 9/11, whether it's the Lehman collapse. If you're in November '08, it's inappropriate to buy a big flashy Rolex if you know your neighbor's losing his job. Staying quiet is what Tiffany calls quiet money. So very wealthy individuals, think about Boston, think about New England, people who have a lot of money, but they will invest in the stock markets. They will invest in a home, but wearable, so to speak, is a no-no. It's inappropriate. And then buying cheap is the discount culture. The 2 for $69.99, the refillable Coke, the all-you-can-eat, the doggy bag, all of these concepts, which are US concepts. This is changing very quickly because the younger generation, and notably the minority generation, the Hispanic community, is very keen to trade up, is very keen to adopt brands because it's okay to reward yourself if you've made it in life. So this is changing quickly, and American people coming from a value for money focus are trading up to brands. The Chinese are going the other way around because they're traveling, because they're all over blogs and forums, and they know what they should be paying. I remember speaking to a manager in Japan where price points were much higher 3 years ago, asking him, why are prices higher? He said initially import duties, a bit of shipping costs, but now it's higher because we can get away with it. The concept of getting away with it is finished. You can't get away with it. People know what they should be paying. And so you're starting to see developments of outlets in China. You're starting to see value for money propositions gain traction. Am I okay? Yep. So can Chinese or other brands be a threat? Gave it away in the title a bit, but for me it's going to take quite a while for Chinese brands to become a threat to Western models. One reason is history. You're probably familiar with this policy from 1966, destroying the four olds, old culture, old customs, old habits, old ideas. All of that needs to be erased because we need to think about the next generation. We're building the future. So obviously, if you're looking for storytelling, it's easier if your brand has been around for 150 years. It's not impossible to tell a good story if you've been around for 2 or 20 years. It's just slightly more difficult. Then there's this idea of good enough versus not good enough. You have a lot of producers in China who will produce this product and say, yeah, it works, and I'll produce it, and hopefully I have a market. If it doesn't work, I'll move on to another venture. The reason I left marketing functions in luxury is it was never good enough. I was developing products. People looked at it, and they said, this little detail that no one will ever see, we have to change it. Okay, so there's this obsession for perfection. And there's also this idea that made in China or made by Chinese, I thought it was a Western stereotype that it wasn't seen as valuable. And actually, when you interview Chinese consumers, anything that's made in China or made by Chinese is a no-no, bizarrely. So you have a hurdle of basically convincing your own people that what you're doing is proper quality. Another way to put it is to look at what, how, why. So this is taken from a book that's called Start With Why. So why is your brand around in the sense of not to make money, but what's the added value to the consumer? Most brands know what they're producing, hopefully, how they're distributing and producing, but not necessarily why. In this book, so this is a bit outdated, but the author talks about Apple. They're producing computers. How in this production site and with this retail. And why do consumers buy Apple? Not because they're computers. In his view, they were buying computers at the time from Apple because it was a rebel brand. Okay? It set you apart. It actually positioned you as a consumer. The fact that they're producing tablets is quasi-irrelevant. So not a lot of producers from China know what their why is. Korean brands, in my view, can be a threat. This is the way I used to see the development of premium products. I've called it Kojak because I thought it was fun, and I can remember it more easily. So take the example of Tiffany. You develop in your continent of origin, you move to Japan as early adopters, you move across the Atlantic, initially London, and then other parts of Europe. And then you ended up in China. The future model might just be Korean brands developing in their small domestic market, making it big in Asia, and rolling out in the world. So you all probably have heard about the Hallyu, Korean wave, social, cultural trends, K-pop, soap operas. 15 years ago, started 15 years ago. The reality is it's only moving the needle now in terms of product because brands have become smart about it. And you have a lot of product placements. And you have people queuing outside of Saint Laurent to buy lipstick, outside of Burberry to buy trench coats. Simply because those products were embedded in series like My Love from the Star. I suspect a lot of you have watched it. And so you have developments of products or brands like this beautiful red backpack, which is technically part of a brand called MCM, which is a German brand bought by Korean assets. Dax is a British brand bought by Korean assets. And then you have funky-sounding French names like Couronne or Louis XIV, which being French for me is hilarious. Louis XIV develops leather goods and accessories facing Louis Vuitton stores. And when you interview the CEO, he says, same quality, half the price. It is half the price. I don't judge quality. But the idea is you have very relevant Korean brands in cosmetics, in leather, in smartphones, in sporting goods, et cetera, becoming a lot more relevant. And then you also have value for money lifestyle brands. You know who she is? Okay, so that's Tory Burch. The idea is apparently, her stores are representative of her home. I can't verify that, but when you buy Tory Burch, you're buying the lifestyle. The one on the right, you know who that is? No? Michael Kors.
Oh, my.
So again, here, the product is not really what you're going after. You're going after this representation of a jet set. Michael Kors in this ad is a bit like Gucci in the 60s. That's what you're aspiring to. The product is not at the core. This is more a slide for brand managers to tell them, when you're working at Gucci, your competitor is not Vuitton, and vice versa. The world is a lot more open than that, and you're actually competing for a very small space, which is that little bottom right corner. The first time I went to Korea, I met one of the brand managers for leather goods. I won't say who. And I asked him, who's your key competitor? And he answered, the cosmetic surgeon.
Oh my God.
And I was thinking it was a joke. The reality is it's not a joke. When you turn 21, when you get married, that's the alternative. You can get a 2,000 euro equivalent Vuitton bag. You can get a beautiful Apple product, or you can take the option of eyelid or nose operation. Think about budget competition. Don't think you're in a silo. The world is very open, and the consumer decides. And the consumer will decide with budget in mind. Okay, so substitutes in mind. And substitutes go way beyond products. Speaking of going way beyond products, I think the key differentiation between luxury brands for the future will be around non-material elements, will be around service, will be around knowing how to project a different image. If you go back to the pyramid of Maslow, buying products is not the higher step. The higher step is self-actualization. Who am I really? And what do I think about myself? And do I accept myself, et cetera, et cetera? So the idea is products are fine, but if you go back to the Michael Kors ad, it's not about products. It's about who am I trying to be? Who do I aspire to be in the future? I've never given such a short presentation, but thank you very much for listening. Comments, questions, rude comments?
We have time for Q&A, so if anyone has a question, could you please raise your hand and state your name or organization if you're with one? Oh, right here, so.
Hi, I'm Andrew Davis from Bloomberg. I was just curious, the title of your book, the subtitle is Why It Will Continue. I was wondering if you could address that, why you're confident that the Chinese economy is going to continue to expand at the pace it's been expanding, and it's kind of a debt-fueled growth we've been seeing. For many, it's reminiscent of what happened in the States, and there's going to be a day of reckoning. There are a lot of people that are pretty negative.
Yeah. I'm a marketing guy. As you mentioned, I didn't mention anything about macro or economics, and that's on purpose. The reason consumers buy into luxury is not necessarily down to financial means, bizarrely. If that were the case, you would have already Indonesian, Brazilian, Indian, Nigerian moving the needle way beyond the Chinese. So I think it's this willingness to fit in. It's this willingness to stand out, fit in and stand out at the same time. It can seem contradictory, but it's basically you're buying your space and you're telling people around you, I'm worthy of doing business with. I'm worthy of hanging out with. Theoretically, you could be having a lot of Indian consumers in this space, and there are a lot of reasons you don't have a lot of Indian consumers in this space. There are a lot of wealthy individuals, but they have a culture in India of leather, of gold, of jewelry generally, and they will look at things from a very different bias. So when I used to work at Cartier, I had a wealthy Indian couple walking into the store, taking a piece of jewelry, weighing it, and saying, there's no way this is worth 4,000 euros. It's ridiculous. Because they don't value the same things. They will value the quality of the raw material. They will not value as much the design or the logo or the red little box at Cartier. That's irrelevant. Give me a real product. So I think it's just a question of perception. The reason I think it's going to continue, as I briefly mentioned, is I don't think there's any local substitute for the time being. And I think more importantly, if you look at the wave of middle-class expansion, there's a lot more coming now. I mean, there's actually a whole part in the beginning of the book which explains how this wave is going to move the needle in the next few years. There's actually a reason I stop in 2025. First, because I'm a financial analyst, so I'm actually used to thinking 12 months out, so already thinking 10 years out is huge. But beyond that, in 2026, that's actually the year when demographics go in the wrong direction in China. But I think you have a roadmap which is still very open and which I'm not going to say is uncorrelated from the economy, decorrelated, but I think if you look at travel trends, and again, 4% of passport holders, if that 4 goes to 8, everyone who's saying in Milan or Paris, oh my God, these queues are incredible, they better get used to it. Okay? So I think it's more a question of access. And where travel is in its infancy. Outbound travel from China, even though you might not think so, is just starting.
Do you have any more questions? We've got Jeannie Charlie there.
Then we have one here.
Oh, we have one there? The microphone. Oh.
The mic's
Sorry.
Yeah, hi, Lynn Grebstad, GHC Asia. Yes, some brands like Louis Vuitton, they've sort of established this gained this reputation for being ubiquitous bling in a place like China. I mean, how do companies like that reassert their dominance in the market, in the luxury market, when they're sort of losing out to that ubiquitousness?
Yeah. So I went to Korea for the first time 4 years ago and interviewed most of the department store people who said Vuitton is mastige. And I used to work in cosmetics. I know what mastige meant there, but a 2,000 euro handbag being mastige was a bit odd. Or they also call it in Korea the 3-second bag, because when you walk the streets of Seoul, every 3 seconds you see a Vuitton handbag. So yes, it's difficult to address. I think the way you address it is by developing an illusion of scarcity. The reality of scarcity, it's too late for that, okay? Because they are technically mass-produced products now. But you have to find ways of nurturing the illusion of scarcity. And the way you do that is by communicating differently, window displays, advertisements, but also in terms of segmenting the experience. Think about here. Hong Kong is very interesting because Hong Kong, if you're Vuitton, you need to cater to super wealthy, sophisticated tourists, more the mass tourists, and then also locally, the middle class in Hong Kong, and then the uber wealthy Tai-Tais. They don't want to have the same experience in store. And so you end up developing very big stores where you have VIP salon, because I don't want to mix with the crowd. And then you have tills where it's all about volume. And you find ways, it's costly, but you find ways of answering everyone's needs without alienating anyone's perception of the brand. But again, it's costly. Vuitton right now, they actually have a flat in Hong Kong to present their new collection. It's a VVVVVIP flat. Okay? The idea is, I'm not going to show my new collection in a hotel, because that's so passé. I'm not going to do it in my store, because you can go to my store any day. I will invite you, because you're special. Okay? I will invite you in my flat that you've never heard about, which is a temporary flat, which will actually close mid-October, but just for you, come and have a drink. Okay? So if you're very special, the brand will make sure to spend or to adapt to still make you feel very special and not go elsewhere. But it's difficult, clearly.
Hi, I'm Jeannie Cho Lee from Le Pen Media. The area that I know best is F&B and wine. And from what I've seen over the last several years, especially with the austerity measures in China and the feedback that I've received from Moet Hennessy, part of the LVMH group, and all of those sort of large luxury companies, is that there's been a real slowdown. And when I talk to people in China now, they just everyone from the front line onwards, whether it's the restaurant manager who's trying to meet the budget and so forth, they don't see any change in this austerity measure in the next 3 to 5 years. So how do you think that impacts your projection of what you just presented to us about the luxury market?
Well, to be fair, I don't see any massive inflection either. Okay, there are some subsectors of consumption that have been and continue to be hit by the anti-corruption campaign. And I'm not taking a view that corruption will come back. Not at all. I think what's happened is you've started to have the communication on anti-corruption starting in August, September 12th. It took a while for people to realize that the Xi administration was quite serious about things. So actually, a lot of the businesses were not affected immediately. They were affected late 12, early 13. But if you look at Baijiu, if you look at banqueting, if you look at cognac, if you look at high-end watches, all of those subsectors of consumption took a massive hit. So 2013, you saw a lot of miserable figures for those types of subsectors. The way I think about it is it's very healthy, because the growth rates you'll see now will be true consumption, personal consumption, personal gifting, self-purchasing, etc., not something that's artificially high for the wrong reasons linked to corporate gifting. And if you look at watches, you can take the view that you were walking on a pretty high cliff artificially. Those campaigns made you fall from that cliff. You landed on a beach, wondering where you were. You went sideways for a while. But actually, if you look at the latest figures, you're seeing a pickup in watches in China now. Again, not that corruption is coming back. It's simply that self-purchasing, the market, has cleaned off the bulk of those artificial sales and is starting to grow again. Now, to your point about F&B, banqueting, drinks, etc., it takes a lot longer because high-end watches are not distributed everywhere in China. They are distributed in some of the core cities. And so it's quite easy to eliminate. But if you're thinking about banqueting and baijiu and cognac, the diffusion, the number of cities, small cities where all of this was taking place, it's taking a lot longer to eliminate that from the equation. But if you're LVMH and you're selling cognac, Hennessy, or if you're their competitor at Pernod or Rémy or whatever, it's very painful. But I don't think it's going to last forever because you will, again, you fall from that cliff, you stabilize, and then you look at who your true consumers are, who can actually pay for stuff themselves, not just on expense as a client for a deal, to take you out and have you have a good time, etc. That is gradually eliminated. On F&B, it's longer than on high-end watches. That's it.
Any more questions from the floor? Oh, there you go, Florence.
Yes, I was told a long time ago that Japanese took a long time to come out of the brand thing, and the Chinese apparently have learned faster to move out of precisely the bling and go into quality. Is this something you touch on, and is it true according to your research?
I think the biggest surprise for the brand managers is speed. But it's speed at identifying what's hot, what's not, what's for my generation. And the speed is, again, linked to blogs and forums and the way consumers in China communicate with their friends and their areas of influence. The speed doesn't, for now, imply a move away from brands. It just implies a move to the next brand. I often hear the comment from brand managers, Chinese consumers in luxury, they're terrible, they're not loyal at all. I think it's wrong. I think the reality is they're very young and wealthy and demanding. And so it's not them that are not loyal, it's the brand that are slow, and for some of them, pretty poor at adapting to who their new consumer is. So it's a question of, can you actually match the speed or adapt to a very young consumer? The consumer in Asia generally, and in China specifically, is in her early to mid-20s. The consumer in Europe is about, on average for this space, 10 or 12 years older. The consumer in the US is yet again 7 or 8 years older than the European. Okay, so you're looking at a totally different mindset and a very reactive, very difficult consumer to adapt to.
Any more questions? Oh, we have one more lady at the back.
Hi, Ellen Gora, El Capital. 2 quick questions. The first, do you think that the Apple Watch will cut into any watch demand on the luxury side or even mid-market segment in China? And then the second, if you could comment on where you think the e-commerce strategy for a lot of the luxury players is going.
Yeah. So the Apple Watch, going back to my budget competition comment, will impact this space for sure. The Apple Watch is pitched, I think, at around $350 US, and then it goes higher. But the bulk of what they'll be selling apparently will be $350 US. You've had immediately comments from people in the Swiss watchmaking industry saying, the design is terrible, et cetera, et cetera. But the reality is, yes, it will dent sales on budget competition, but not just watches, small accessories, kit to go running. If you're looking at the latest, if you're a keen runner, you can find a running shoe at $350, believe it or not. I'm not a keen runner, I was told. So yes, it will impact entry price point watches. It will impact other industries that are not related to watches. I'm not a big believer that it will impact very high-end watches. And I take the point that you only have one wrist or 2 wrists to put watches on, and you won't be wearing both. But think about the representation in a business environment in China. you can be super casual. You know, you can almost wear sneakers and never wear a tie. I'm becoming more Chinese now, but you basically have to have the watch that will tell people around the table who you are, and it's not going to be a smartwatch. Similarly, the big events in life, I don't know if you're married or not, but the day you get married, probably you won't be wearing a smartwatch. I don't think so. So, yes, there is budget competition, but it will go way beyond just the watch category. And within the watch category, I think it will affect the entry price points. On your e-commerce question, what was the question? Yeah, so I think e-commerce will be a very big thing for access price points. It is already a big thing for cosmetics, for example. It will become a big thing for small accessories. So if you're thinking about buying a $29 US key fob at Coach, you've seen it before in store, you might be thinking, this would work for my family, friends, etc. Then you might order quite a bit online. So I think e-commerce will move the needle for access price points. For higher ticket items, I tend to think that you want more storytelling. You can tell a good story online, but there's nothing to replace someone who will welcome you in a store, get the champagne, schmooze, get to know the person, hear about the brand, you know, face to face. It will start to creep up, but I think there will be a cap to how much high-end complication watches or bespoke jewelry you can sell online. That's not going to happen. But yeah, it will be relevant for the access price points. My view on e-commerce is that it will be relevant for certain categories, less for higher ticket items. My view on luxury, where brands are late, is not necessarily on that. It's more on the digital marketing front and on this idea that very few brands are actually embracing digital because they're in this sort of old school Italian, French thinking, I say this being French, where they're basically thinking, I don't know this very well, and there's maybe more to lose in terms of brand equity than to gain in terms of recruiting new consumers. And so they stay away from it for the wrong reason. And again, it's about speed. Their consumer is totally connected. They're not. And that's going to become an issue eventually if they don't move.
Any more questions? This is going to be the last one because we're up for time.
So going back to what you were saying about Louis Vuitton's L'Appartement, I'm intrigued about how that actually works because from what I gather is that...
I was not invited. I'm not a VVIP.
I've been. But, so which is why I'm really intrigued with it. So they're inviting like the top 3% of their customers, right? So that's lovely for them. But I think that represents a great danger that the next 20 to 30% of their customers are really, really annoyed by this. Because, you know, they are starting to understand that they haven't been invited. Is that a strategy that you would actually recommend to a luxury company? That it's worth looking after your top 3% and that the rest are so lemming-like that they'll just want to be in that apartment?
Spend more.
Will they spend more? Will they really want to spend more to get there?
No, I think when you're purchasing luxury products, you're aspiring to become or to project an image of someone you hope to be. And you have many ads. Look at the latest Cartier ads. These are products that are not very accessible. But that will draw an audience into the stores who at the end of the day will walk out of the store with something that's more reasonable for their budget. So having a niche alternative VVVVIP strategy actually does work. Because I think you will aspire to, okay, well, they didn't invite me, but I know this fellow who knows this fellow who might get me in. It just creates buzz. And that's what they want. They want to create buzz. They want people to say, I was there. You weren't invited. And you know, it might sound super bizarre and rude and terrible, but actually people who are aspiring to display social status will actually fight to be the next to be invited. So I think it's, you know, you're advertising the super high tip of the pyramid for other people to want to get there. So I don't think, I don't think by doing that they're shooting themselves in the foot, because after, those VVVIPs will actually write about it. They'll tell their friends about it. They'll tell their families. Everyone will know that, wow, Vuitton, I thought it was quite a mass brand. Actually, it's incredible what they've done. Have you heard about the latest thing? Oh, you weren't there. Wow. So you're actually, that's part of the storytelling. It is storytelling. Storytelling is not, I went to the store that everyone knows and I bought the product that everyone can.
Okay, before Lynn asks, let me just give people, it's already 2 o'clock, so if some people have to go back to their office, they can go do so now. Okay, can you give the mic to Lynn, please?
I'd read a couple of articles on the Louis Vuitton situation, and some of the answers were very different. They were approaching the whole situation with pricing. But I'd also heard that they were approaching it with this whole distance thing, like creating their island in Singapore and trying to create that sort of distance between them and their consumers. So what do you think about that?
Well, the island is about 100 yards to walk. I'm not sure I get the distance thing. What they did do with the island is basically put out a message of, people who are saying, I've seen you too much, this is way too common. Well, go to Singapore, it's not common at all. Who has seen a boutique on an island? It's crazy. You go to Plaza 66 in Shanghai, they used to have 1 floor, now they have the whole building. It's amazing. They opened a cinema theater. I'm sounding very bullish on Vuitton, I'm not, but they're finding very interesting ways of telling people, we are not common. We are not your mother's brand. You can find stuff you couldn't dream of. And the retail experience will be fantastic. So when they built that island in Singapore, the idea was to say, you thought we were common, you thought you had seen everything at Vuitton, let us surprise you. Let us have you think differently. Let us have you rediscover our brand. And we don't actually just do leather goods and handbags. We have footwear, we have ready-to-wear, we have eyewear. Did you know? We're about to launch a fragrance, we're doing this and that. So it's just a way to recreate a buzz on a brand where people were thinking, yeah, I've seen it, it's a bit dull, I'm not that interested. It's not dull. The island in Singapore is just thinking out of the box, so to speak.
No, we've got to, sorry, we are over time, so we're going to have to cut this. Thank you, everyone, for coming, and thank you, Erwan, for delivering your insight. Thank you.